Hello one and all, Jasper here, and isn't it so cool to see all the different kinds of Valyrian steel weapons? We got swords, slightly bigger swords, huge swords, curved swords, and that's kind of it, really. Every single Valyrian steel weapon we see is a sword. Some might point out the Valyrian steel dagger used by the cat's paw, but come on, that's just a small sword. And if you do dig into the books, there is a Valyrian steel axe used by House Celticar, but that seems to be the only exception. We know of 19 weapons, and 18 of them are just some sort of sword. But naturally, of course, that makes sense. After all, Valyrian steel is described as being lighter and stronger than steel, on top of holding an edge better. Such material would be wasted if used to make the likes of a warhammer that rely more on weight in order to do damage in battle. But even then, swords aren't the only weapons that would benefit from a sharp edge, such as spears and axes. Not to mention there are tons of different kinds of swords across the world. Long swords, scimitars, katanas, kopeshes, and rapiers. So, is the classic long sword, which is the most often designed we see, the best? Well, let's dig in a bit, and see what conclusion we can come to. We've already dismissed warhammers as a good weapon for the simple fact that they rely on heavy weight of the weapon in order to smash and crunch their way through armor. The stronger material would be a plus, but a very minimal one compared to the loss of weight, which would drastically reduce the overall effect. Such a weapon wouldn't be able to smash the subscriber button, unlike all of you, which means you are all more useful than a Valyrian steel warhammer. But what about a weapon similar to that of a hammer? Like, say, an axe or a war pick. Clearly these weapons rely on cutting and piercing rather than blunt damage, so would gain a lot of benefit from being made from Valyrian steel. That might outweigh the con of them being lighter, as both weapons do still rely on having more weight to deliver those dangerous blows. Yet still, creating these entirely in Valyrian steel? You know what? I'm going to be saying Valyrian steel a lot. So to make my life easier, I'm just going to be saying VS from now on, okay? Anyways, creating these weapons entirely in VS might not even be needed. I'm not an expert, so take this with a grain of salt, but maybe coating an already made steel weapon would be the better choice? That way, your pick and axe still have the heavier weight, and thus the force of their blows is not lessened, and the coated VS allows them to keep their edge and point better. Yet, that feels off, doesn't it? The overall quality of the weapon doesn't go up significantly, except for the price tag. Maybe you could consider this if you didn't have a lot of VS to work with? Not even enough to forge a spear or a dagger. Speaking of, what about those two options? A dagger could be a good option if you don't have a lot of VS and want a weapon on you at all times. But a spear is easily one of the greatest weapons humanity has ever created. Replace that steel tip with some VS and you're making your spear even better. After all, a spear relies far less on the weight of the weapon to do damage, being a puncturing weapon. Now that I think about it, that should probably be a key factor. A weapon that relies on speed should be at the top of the charts, as making it out of a stronger, lighter, and more durable metal is just an upgrade in every way. So rapiers, daggers, and spears are the obvious answer, right?
Wrong.
Obviously, choosing these weapons would be a good choice, especially if they are a weapon you prefer. However, they only take advantage of the extra durability and cutting power of VS, but not so much the weight. Case in point, your average dagger will probably weigh about 1 pound if you made it out of steel. Now, let's say you make it out of VS. Now, we don't know exactly the weight of VS compared to regular steel, but let's go crazy and say it's about half. So that 1 pound dagger is now half a pound. Let's get a bit bigger. An arming sword weighs on average 2.5 pounds. Make that out of some VS and it now weighs 1 1/4, meaning that the weight mitigated is far more than that of the dagger. Why stop at arming swords though? Let's jump all the way up to the largest blade that has standardly been used in a military, and that would be the Zweihander, which at its heaviest could be just under 9 pounds, meaning with some VS, it would be as light as 4.5 pounds, roughly the weight of a bastard sword, which means if you're skilled enough, you could use a great sword with a single hand. You might not want to, as in my research there is a point that regardless of the weight of the blade, using it with a single hand isn't reliable if it gets too long. So it seems like we're on the right track here. Big, fuck-off swords are the name of the game, but what kind? Do you want a straight-edged blade like classic European style, or would a more curved style like the Kriegmeister be the right way to go about it? After all, curved swords have more damaging cuts than straight swords. Now, so far in this video, we've been focusing heavily on the aspect of the weapon and how best to take advantage of VS. However, there is one thing that we've not been talking about really, and that is where you live. Case in point, if you lived in the Dothraki Sea, a curved two-handed blade would be more effective, as you would more often be facing off against lightly armored enemies more susceptible to cutting. However, in the land of Westeros, where your enemies would be steel-clad knights in armor, then a straight sword would be the better option, as its thrusting capabilities would be better at getting into the gaps since cutting would be almost useless against them. Which means we've come to the conclusion that, yeah, swords are the best weapon to go with when using VS, specifically two-handed greatswords. Almost every other weapon would indeed benefit from being made of VS, but swords take the cake. They are almost entirely metal, so the durability bonus comes into effect more often compared to that of a spear or axe, which is mostly wood. More of the weapon would be lighter as well, and unlike hammers and axes, a sword does not rely on its weight nearly as much to do damage. And finally, great swords have the largest edge to them, so you're getting more use out of that material with its famous forever sharp edges. But in all honesty, at the end of the day, what's more important is what weapon you find the most interesting. Don't let me talk you out of your objectively inferior warhammer. My personal pick? Probably be a bastard sword like Jon Snow's Longclaw. It would be a perfect sidearm for protection when walking down a dark alley, and it'd be able to handle itself well in an actual warfare situation. But hey, I'm not perfect. Maybe there is a weapon out there that is clearly a better option, such as the famous katana, a long powerful glaive, a halberd, the legendary sword spear, or the fantastical twin blades. Or a gun! Imagine if we made those out of Valyrian steel. Anyways, that's all I have to say on the topic. But, as always, I would love to hear what you think. What weapon would you choose and why? Comment down below and I promise I will read it. In the meantime, stay safe, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.